14 things you do not need in order to write a book. We live in cynical times. If you look at success stories in the entertainment world, you'll find that a lot of them thrive on making fun of others, or just plain calling them names. From YouTube videos and talent shows to insult comedy and political satire, pointing at someone very specific and saying, "Look how badly they suck," is almost a guarantee for viewers. So it's no surprise that when you set out to fulfill that lifelong dream of yours to write a book, the first thing that goes through your mind is, "Oh my god, how do I keep people from making complete fun of it?" And so we usually turn to the old mantra of doing it right. But honestly, doing it right is for building houses and prescribing medicine. So here are 14 things that everybody says you have to get right when you write, but which you don't really need. Please do know that when I say you don't need them, I'm not saying they do no good, just that you can manage without them and that they're usually overhyped for a whole list of reasons. 1. Spelling, grammar, and vocabulary. Okay, so this is actually 3 things, but they tend to go hand in hand. Remember that teacher who told you that you'd never be able to write anything good if you couldn't spell well or didn't know how to use a semicolon? Well, take it from someone who does spell well and who is a fanatic on the matters of the great dotted comma. It's bunk. Spell checkers are pretty good these days, and nobody outside of school reads to check your spelling. The same goes for vocabulary. Not only do people not always want a writer to flaunt the word per day calendar they got for Christmas, they may actually want someone who has a down-to-earth language. Oh, and that last sentence contained a semicolon. Points for who can find it. Fact is, you're not trying to write correctly, you're trying to write well. And well means something people can understand and which flows easy when reading. I constantly leave out commas that would turn my longer sentences into Morse code, and if I feel my language gets a bit dull, I look up a synonym or 5 in an online thesaurus. See, a lot of this right mentality stems from the days when looking up things would make your work take 10 times as long. Nowadays, it might double or triple your work time, but your work will get read by very different people too. And finally, nobody should just publish a first draft. When you're done writing, check your work or have someone skilled in this stuff check it for you. Maybe drop them a shiny penny or a big favor for it. If you're spending a day trying to figure out if you're using an apostrophe right, you're doing it wrong. Just put the sentence in a YouTube forum and let the grammar Nazis do that work for you. They love that stuff. 2. Structure. Back in the late 70s, something really big happened in the entertainment industry. Star Wars. It was a smash hit, wiping all previous ideas of movie success off the table and paving the way for a brand new view of storytelling. Sadly, that view was kind of narrow, and everyone wanted a seat on George Lucas's money boat, made of money fueled by money with money in the money. See, a big part of its success is now thought to be the structure of the story, typically called the monomyth, or a hero's journey. And it goes something like this. There's this person, you see, who is really down on his or her luck, or is just being really whiny. But behold, a chance to go on an adventure, in which a lot of other people will join and help, often for no logical reason. Until a villainous villain is encountered and everybody needs an uplifting speech to go and defeat the villainous villain. And then they do. Add in some romance, teen angst, or special effects for flavor. How many movies did that describe for you? Harry Potter, The Matrix, The Avengers, hell, even Twilight follows the model. And they're all big hits, right? Must be the whole structure thing. That means structure equals success, right? Except no, there are thousands of monomyth stories out there that are mocked as flops or idiocy, or simply die without being noticed at all. Meanwhile, most books and some authors who changed the landscape of storytelling forever had little or no structure, or their structures were so radically different that they might as well have had none at all. Neuromancer, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the collective works of H.P. Lovecraft would make any fan of the monomyth wet themselves in fear, with chaotic plots crisscrossing and more than half the fun being just enjoying the writing of the worlds created. Hell, I read all those stories and I can even tell you the structure, because I was so caught up in the story as it just unfolded. Structure is like sugar. It makes everything a bit easier to swallow, so everyone who wants to push something on you will cling to it. And if you just want to write something quick and get it out the door, structure can help. But rigid structure is not needed to write a good story, and it definitely will not guarantee a story worth enjoying. 3. Fact-checking. A lot of big hit stories are set in made-up places, because then nobody can drive by your house late at night screaming, "You moron! There were no coffee houses in central London in the late 1800s!" or whatever. See, I didn't fact-check that, and most likely you don't care. Even more likely, you now care a little and will fact-check it later, just to get your wiggy-wiggy on. But it doesn't add or subtract from what I'm saying. And neither will a lot of the other kinds of fact-checking. See, I write about a girl in the city of Nakskov in southern Denmark. And after a meeting at a local school about some writing workshops, I realized that a monument of steel and iron that I had included in one of the first chapters of my book wasn't even built when the book took place. But that doesn't hurt the story, even if people reading it know that. I wish I'd known it, because getting things right is really cool. And I want to be really cool, so that everybody will love me and buy my books and offer their eternal service to me in worship. But they don't do that because of fact-checking. They do that because of good stories. Otherwise, every movie with sound in space would have flopped. Until this day, the only storyline I know to have consistently silent space scenes is Firefly, and it got cancelled. Meanwhile, Star Trek and Star Wars are still going strong with pew-pew lasers and completely inaccurate space explosions. Fact-checking is important if the things being checked are really important. Don't claim that there were diesel engine jets in Victorian England unless you're doing some very unusual science fiction, but don't spend 80% of your time on a book trying to find out if soldiers of that period buttoned their uniforms left or right, when what you write about has more to do with monster hunts in misty cobblestone streets. Unless fact-checking is your selling point, in which case I respect and admire your insanity, people will rarely get put off your stories from a bit of inaccuracy. They'll be put off your stories because you spent your time researching buttons, rather than write something that was fun and interesting. 4. Writing tools. Time for a harsh lesson of life. If you cannot write a story by hand using nothing but a pencil and a lot of coffee, then you cannot write a story, period. The reason we wrote on typewriters and now write on computers is not because it makes the story any better, but because we've got shit to do, and this is just faster, damn it. There are a whole mess of software out there that will claim that they can make your writing so much easier, but none of it is really true. Sure, some people like to have something that will keep chapters neatly available or can look up a word for you, but it's small stuff, and it'll never pull your story out of the fires of bad storytelling. Most of it is no more advanced than having a second document open to keep notes in. It just looks nicer. There really isn't much more to say on this piece than that. Don't look for writing tools to save your story, because they do not exist. Either write your story or figure out how to write a better one. 5. Formal education. Which brings us to this weird little thing. Yes, a lot of people think that writing stories is like designing jet engines, in that you learn a complex trade to do it better. I won't argue that you shouldn't learn about writing. After all, this is basically an instructional video, and I'll be making more of them, and they will make you a marvelous writer! But you don't have to take courses, or go to a school to become a writer. I never did, nor did most of other writers, at least not the successful ones. You learn to write by writing and being told what is good and bad about it. And if you're really big on studying, you can get ideas from courses or videos or even, gasp, writer's school. But being an uneducated slob doesn't mean you can't write. It just means you have to figure out a few more things on your own. Or that you'll write something very unusual, which might not always be a bad thing. 6. Life experience. Write what you know is a bit of a mantra among writers, and especially amongst discount writing coaches and cheap how-to-write DVDs. The idea here is that by having lived through something, you know enough about it to write about it, and write it well. And that sounds pretty logical. I mean, writing about war is easy if you were a soldier or a refugee or at least studied military strategy at some point. And science fiction can probably be better if you know about the science part of it as well. But where do you get the experience to write about magic or aliens or teleportation or the mind of a psychotic serial killer? Wait, please keep that last one to yourself if you have an answer. Sure, people can work in fields that give them some insights, but a lot of writing is imagining, often by necessity. Also, a good story tends to have a broad range of content, from personal conflicts to social issues to technical jargon to, well, that lunatic cutting up bodybuilders with a rusty nail file. Again, please do not let me know if you have experience with that. I don't get my allotted 5 hours of sleep each night as it is. But even more so, good stories often come from reimagining something, and that often comes from ignorance. The aforementioned book Neuromancer by William Gibson. Basically, he created the entire genre now known as cyberpunk. And it did so because Gibson had no real idea how hacking worked. So he imagined a future where hacking was almost like virtual reality video games, except very, very dangerous. Because of that, you've probably seen both good and bad examples of hacking or attacking machines by something virtual reality. What did Gibson call that virtual world? Why, the Matrix. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Also, all this ignores the fact that you can read up on almost any professional lifestyle easily these days, and the excuse, "I'm researching a book," will make people gladly help you find information on the density of human bone or the extradition laws of Singapore. Being a writer lets you ask people the weirdest things. Go on, try it out. 7. Plot. This is a bit of a throwback to structure. What's your book about is not really the same question as what happens in your book, but a lot of people think it is. A book can be about the experience of losing a loved one and dealing with it emotionally, even if the story basically describes someone going to work and forgetting to buy a birthday present. But if your story is very narrow, that can be hard to know, because everything is about how your main hero completes step 1, 2, and 3 of the structure. As also mentioned about structure, I don't really recall the plot of Neuromancer, or of Hitchhiker's Guide, and I know that H.P. Lovecraft wasn't really about plot at all, but was satisfied to merely create the most original horror ever put on paper. And these are works of fiction that I enjoy immensely. A plot is a way to answer that what happens in your book question more easily, but it's neither a prerequisite nor a guarantee of a good story. Good stories can come from following a bunch of friends getting into different kinds of trouble or try to pull off a bunch of half-assed ideas, which is why a lot of TV comedy shows have very little plot in any real sense. If you want plot, have plot, but don't let it steal you away from telling the story. That story tends to be about people going through something and reacting to it while the world around them unfolds before the reader's eyes. If a plot helps you write that, all power to you. If not, then all power to you nonetheless. 8. Relatable characters. Another fallout of the success of Star Wars was the idea of having a main character that is, in a sense, a loser. Not because Luke Skywalker never becomes a cool character, but because he starts out being a very whiny little twerp. and sticks to that for a large part of the movies, even after he gains his superpowers. And yes, the Force is just a superpower, no matter how cool and mystical it was until someone said midichlorians. Popular movies are full of whiny twerps like that, and people eat it up. Why? Because they feel that even if their lives are not as sorry as those lives, they can see themselves in those roles, dealing with those problems and, especially, having those adventures. It's a bit harder to see yourself as Tony Stark or Bruce Wayne, or as the guy who became RoboCop, unless, of course, you're actually a billionaire playboy, or an actual cyborg. Hi, Jenna! The idea of relatable characters is that there is someone in the story that is the body double for the reader, and the reader can therefore imagine themselves taking that role, which is all nice, but that's not always a good thing. Does your reader want to imagine themselves in a story about an axe murderer, or a medieval prisoner of war on the run? Do your female readers reject a book because all the realistic characters are male and deal with male situations in a male world, or vice versa? Does a book aimed at children need to have an adult as one of the main characters for adults to enjoy it? Probably not. Relatable characters are yet another shortcut to getting the readers to think, hey, this is an easy book to handle if I have very little imagination. But readers do increasingly have a lot of imagination. And there are far too many begging for the unimaginative crowd that needs a point-by-point guide on how to imagine a story. And finally, just because a character is not relatable doesn't mean readers cannot sympathize. If your kind-hearted protagonist has her entire family kidnapped and is left for dead, a lot of readers will, hopefully, have problems relating personally to that. But if the character was written well, they will cheer for her nonetheless. 9. Lots of free time. Whenever you hear about someone having written a book, there's always this added little bit about how it was a tough challenge that took years and forced them to shy away from family and friends and live on water and whatever bugs they could catch in their danky basement of despair. Writing a book is seen almost like building the White House to full scale out of toothpicks. It takes a huge amount of time and should only be attempted by the batshit insane. You can write a book in a month. In fact, a lot of people do. Every year, the National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo, challenges people to write a book in a month, and lots of people do it. Even people with school or jobs. The quality varies greatly, but they prove it possible again and again. Imagine if they had 3 months. Most of the whole writing nightmare has to do with procrastination and doubt, two things often turned into the old writer's block excuse. A single book page contains about 400 to 500 words, which most people can write in under half an hour, and a lot of people can do in half that. Try writing something that doesn't really matter and which you won't stop writing about because of self-doubt, and you'll see. Or just check the total word count of your last 5 Facebook updates, which probably took you about a minute or two each. The point, of course, is to write at a similar speed, but with a real story coming from it. And that's not a matter of the time or your writing speed. That's a matter of thinking up a good story and knowing how to write. Quite coincidentally, that is what future videos of mine aim to improve. 10. A clear genre. When people ask, what kind of book are you writing? They never mean whether it's a good or a bad book, or if it's long or short, or if it's clever or dumbed down. They mean genre. Are you writing a crime story, a spy thriller, epic fantasy, science fiction, horror, dinosaur erotica? And yes, those exist. Google it. Or, don't. They mean what genre are you writing in? And with all the clearly defined movies with books behind them, genre is becoming more about picking sides than analyzing your work. But you don't need a genre. Genres are like junk food franchises. They just let customers know that very little is going to surprise them. If your genre is fantasy, readers won't usually have to deal with the idea of aliens or environmental politics. If you pick horror, they can expect to be scared and enjoy the expectation. If you pick dinosaur erotica, they can expect to be raided by the FBI and the National Association of Paleontologists. Genres mean that you have a ready-made toolset of things to include, and anyone picking up your work only has themselves to blame if they don't understand this weird world of magic and fairies your story is set in. It lets you build on pre-existing ideas in the readers. But if you don't need those ideas, or if you can't get them in other ways, there's no rule holding you back. Some of the most amazing books and movies have been written by people who threw genre convention out the door after setting it on fire. The genre convention, not the door. And if they do it well, someone is just going to come along and call their work some new genre, and later writers can follow in their footsteps. Again, Neuromancer by William Gibson created cyberpunk. 11. Detailed descriptions. Honest to God, I love me some intricate, flavor-dripping, smells and bells descriptions. I want the scenery to be so solid I can cut my fingers on it, and so pungent I need to spray the book with air freshener after each read. I want sentences the length of my arm about the texture of a table and 5 pages spent on a character contemplating the design of a garden. I freaking love descriptions. But I also write for other people, and they do not always share that love. Many have grown up with more films than books, because films are quicker. That means they tend not to dwell on scenery or flowery language and just want to get on with the story. And there's nothing wrong with that. In many ways, detailed descriptions are a genre of writing, in that you can choose different levels of it and it brings certain tools and options with it. You can describe an entire mansion as nice and roomy with expensive stuff everywhere, Or you can have the patterns on the wallpaper tell 1,000 stories whenever your characters enter a new room. But in the end, it's not about right or wrong. It's about your personal choice when writing. Some people want to smell and touch and feel your creation, while others just want you to get on with the story, damn it. 12. Permission. Remember all that jazz about writing about made-up places? Yeah, there's a whole second level on that house, and it's about permissions. See, if you have to include something in your story from the real world, you may need permission. But you don't always need it. If you want to write about a real town, you can, as long as you do not portray real people in it by name, or so detailed that the name no longer matters, and show specific stores and the like the same respect. You can say someone went to eat at a local restaurant in the town, but you can't use a real name or a description close enough to make it indistinguishable. And there's a whole range of technicalities there. For example, is they ate at the local McDonald's really too much detail, since McDonald's is such a standard part of cities by now? Is describing a shrimp-themed restaurant by the docks enough to make people know what you're talking about? If the town is small enough, is writing a line about the local nag lady who yelled at young kids and waved her cane wildly too on the nose? In most cases, as long as you don't demonize anyone, it tends to lean towards being okay. Public places and rough detail is up for grabs though. Laws vary from country to country, but writing about a murder in, say, Central Park should be perfectly legal. And again, if it's impossible to know precisely who or what you're referring to in the real world, it's going to be nigh impossible to put a finger on you. And in the end, even if you want to go full exposition on someone, maybe they're okay with it. I have written permissions to use several shops in my town, complete with details and all, in my stories. And half of them know that it'll be a fight scene, and that it'll wreck their place. They just like being a part of it. What you rarely need permission to write about is topics. To put it bluntly, major writers regularly write about rape, abuse, underage sex, drinking, drugs, satanic rituals, corporate conspiracies, and fly fishing. And they don't always remember to wave a finger and say, "This is very bad, and I only write about it because it's bad." Most literature for teenagers that includes sex scenes between young teens are written by adults, and many are written by someone of the opposite sex as the main character in the scene. While I do not feel that stoked about writing about teenagers boning, I do have brief scenes of nudity, because I use it as a metaphor for youthful vulnerability and insecurity. And that's the nudity of a teen girl, while I am an adult male. Which might again explain why I don't really feel like going all about chicka wow wow with it. Or I'd feel really awkward and would no doubt blush to a lethal degree. But you don't really need to get permission for topics, unless you're basically instructing or encouraging people to do crimes. Of course, writing about heroic terrorists, especially if you're an American, might get you an uncomfortable visit from the authorities, so don't go pointing at me if you take it too far. 13. Inspiration. This is where a lot of people are going to throw up their hands and yell foul, or some other sports metaphor. But no, you do not need some great inspiration for writing. Not if you just really want to write. I'll dare some self-promotion on this one. Or maybe I'll ruin myself, but hell, I'll take the chance. The Embassy of Time stories have precisely two reasons to exist. I like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I find time travel endlessly interesting. More broadly, I like a strong female protagonist with emotional depth and a supporting cast of fairly normal people with a lot of attitude. And I like time travel stories like Doctor Who, Terminator, and Back to the Future. And I wanted to write something like that and make it open to anyone to participate in. The idea of making it about real places in a real town came as I learned about my new hometown of Knoxville. But basically, I just wanted to write Buffy with time travel. From then on, it wasn't about sudden inspiration, but about building the story, damn it. Much of it evolved from simply writing and letting the logic of the story push me on. And most of the rest was just a matter of figuring out what challenges would be cool to have them face. I didn't have the full story pop fully formed into my head. I actually sat down and created it, bit by bit. On the other hand, I have 2.5 books written, entirely written, from a sudden moment of blindingly clear inspiration, and once that ebbed out, I didn't quite know what to do with the rest of the story. So yeah, inspiration is fine and dandy, but writing a story isn't like being a spiritual medium for some divine muse. You get some ideas, and you write a story, and if those ideas are few and basic, you write from that. This is one of the spots where the whole disclaimer about this video not saying that you should avoid these things really comes in. If you work without inspiration, knowing a lot about writing is really smart. It doesn't have to be an education, but watch some videos about writing and about critics analyzing classic stories. Maybe pick up a good book on writing with the emphasis on being good. Stephen King has a fairly good one, as do other famous writers, but they deal mostly with the emotional process. Some of the smaller academic books are good, but mostly think about what makes a good story and build from there. Or, just watch all of my videos, preferably multiple times. 14. A publisher. Welcome to the final release from your prison of fear and doubt. No, my dear subjects, you do not need to have a publisher. Not only is self-publishing becoming far more acceptable, but publishers are becoming very picky about what writers they will do what for. If you can mount some discipline in proofreading your work, and if you are willing to listen closely to anyone who will read it for you, you can get far on your own. Publishers increasingly ask writers to handle a lot of the marketing through things like social media, unless they feel like gambling some serious money on a few billboards, etc. Having a publisher in no way means that your book is done. Its life continues as you talk about it and reach out to fans, or as you develop a mysterious aura of reclusive and forbidden stories, making the unwary seek you out in... I've said too much. In any case, the time has long passed when being a writer was entirely, or even mostly, about the writing. If you only want to write, you don't just need a publisher, you need an entire marketing branch, and those rarely come cheap. Writing is easy, but being a writer is hard, and most never make it as profitable a job as, say, flipping burgers. We're all batshit crazy here, and that's the only reason we do this. Otherwise, we'd go out and have ourselves real respectable jobs. So, all praise the irresponsible craziness and go write those bestsellers. Just remember who put you on that path, because I'll be watching you. Bye!